Hello, I'm Jerry, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the expansion for the popular roll and write dice game, Qwixx. This is the Qwixx Connected expansion. This is essentially just two score pads that you're going to be able to add to your base game. So there's about 290 sheet pads, single-sided, and I got these together for about €3, so plus shipping. So I did have to import them from Germany, but the rulebook that comes with them is multilingual. There's only essentially one page of English rules for this. So I'll assume that you've played the game Qwixx if you're watching this video. I'll show you what's new on those score pads, and I'll come back and give you some quick impressions about what I think about the improvements to the game. I'll assume most people who are watching this video have already played the roll and write game Qwixx. If not, just very briefly, it's a game where players are going to be taking turns rolling these multicolored dice and then using them to mark off numbers in these various colored rows. The catch being that you essentially cannot go backwards once you've proceeded along a row. So if I mark off this 3 and then this 5, I can never go back and fill in the 2 and 4. And the game will give you points based on how many at the end of the game, which could be triggered when 2 of the rows get completed by any number of players, or until a player gets 4 penalties because they can't mark something off on their sheet. It will give you points for however many spaces you've marked off on each row, and the most points would win. So it's a pretty popular, pretty simple game. I won't go into a full rules explanation. There are other videos out there that will show you that. What I want to show you are the 2 new score pads that come in the Qwixx Connected game. So there's 2 of them. This one is called the Chain, and this one is called Steps. And I should note that in this variant, each player is going to get a different score sheet. So you can see here that they're marked from A through E, and each one of them is going to be different. So this one, you can see the stairs go down like this, whereas this one, they go like this. So each player will have a slightly different score pad, so that's nice. It'll be differentiated. So the first one, and I'd say the simpler one, although they're both pretty simple, is called the Steps. So I'll just hold it here and explain. So it plays almost identically to the normal game of Qwixx, except that at the end of the game, you can see there are these ones with the heavy border. You essentially score those as if they were a 5th row. So there's 11 numbers here that have the borders along them, and you would just score them according to the same matrix that you would score for any of your completed rows. So you could get up to 66 extra points for filling in these. Of course, that means you have to go in different rows as opposed to concentrating on one single row. But that's how this works, so it's pretty simple. And this one's pretty simple as well to explain. It has a little bit more strategic considerations in it. And the way that this one works is, if ever you cross, you can see that there are numbers here that are linked. So the 3 and the 11 are linked here. These 2 6s are linked. And again, that's going to be different on various pads, which numbers are going to be linked for different players. So each player is going to have a different score sheet with this as well. And the rule here is that, for example, if I cross off this yellow 3, I also it's mandatory that I have to cross out this green 11. If I cross out this green 9, I have to cross out this blue 9. That even applies if, for example, if I've already progressed my blue to here, and then I cross out the green 9, even though I'm already past it, I could go back there. So it works both as a second chance and as a way of forcing you ahead. So if I hadn't started my yellow row yet, but I already got to green 6, then I would be forced to cross out the yellow 8, and before going all these spaces back here. So it's a double-edged sword on that one. And otherwise, the scoring works identical to the base game. There's no bonus points. It's just essentially the potential to cross out 2 things with one die selection. And that is how you play the Chain variant. Okay, so that is Qwixx Connected, and I think that to a certain degree there's not a lot to say about this. They're just 2 very small variants to a game that many players are familiar with already. But at the same time, for what this cost, which is essentially €3 I paid for it, this is really a nice and welcome twist to what is, to me, one of the better roll and write games. This game's maybe now about 5 or 6 years old, and it's held up over time as a lot of roll and writes have continued to come out over the various years. So what I will say is that there's two variants, the steps and the chain. I prefer the chain expansion. So the steps one is interesting. One thing that could happen in the original game of Qwixx, and of course it's a dice game, so it required a player to get somewhat lucky, is a player could really just concentrate on completing 2 rows and triggering the end of the game, where other players might be going more slowly and working across many rows, and that would be a winning strategy if you're able to get enough crossed out in those 2 rows early on, because you would have, the way the points work in this game, they essentially compound. Your 5th cross in a given row is worth 5 points, your 6th one's worth 6 points, and so on. So there's an increasing incentive to specialize in one of those rows. And what's interesting about the steps variant is that because those steps on the score sheet are staggered among the various rows, they encourage you to not specialize in a given row, but to try and hit all of those across the multiple rows. And they effectively score double. They score for both the row that they're in and then also for your collection of steps at the end of the game. So because of that, it does make the strategy of meandering between the various rows more viable versus I guess a rush strategy of focusing on 1 or 2 rows and just trying to hit every number in that. So that, I think, is an interesting variant, and it's so painless to add to the base game. I think you'd always want to play this as opposed to the base game. There's no reason not to do that. The other one is more interesting, I think, though. It's the chain variant, and that's because it adds a light element of strategy. There's a reason why you might not take a number that's further along in your row, because it forces you to take that second number with it. Sometimes that's going to be a positive thing, only get you points, but sometimes it's going to force progress among a row that you haven't really started working on yet. So this does tend to speed up the game a little bit too, because there's unintended consequences of that actions where players might get forced to progress a row that they hadn't yet really progressed on. So sometimes players don't take what would be, normally an obvious best move if you were playing with the standard rules, because they don't want to take the other linked checkbox. So again, but also sometimes it just works out that you luckily get more points because you're marking off something that you hadn't yet marked off in the other row that you've already passed. So it makes it a slightly more interesting game. And again, this one is maybe not one you'd want to use every time, but it's interesting to see how it plays out. Sometimes those connections really mess with your plans. So all in all, for the price that you're going to pay for these 2 small pads, well worth it. It's a game that extends the longevity of what I think is already a game that's proven itself over time. It's not the only expansion that's come out over the game, but I do prefer it to some of the other expansions that have come out. So definitely would recommend that people seek these out. They're inexpensive and they add to what is already an excellent game. Those are my thoughts on Qwixx Connected, and thank you for watching.